Harley Davidson is one of the earliest motorcycle brands in the world. With an estimated net worth of $7 billion, it is often seen as the face of American identity. But behind the brand's tough build and thunderous speed, the company was founded by two factory workers from immigrant families. They began in a small wooden shed in rural Milwaukee, and the world mocked their innovation by calling it a cowboy machine that needed tomato cans in its carburetor just to run. The company faced two world wars, a market crash, and its own identity crisis. Yet, against all odds, they survived everything. Today, Harley Davidson isn't just a motorcycle brand, it's a symbol of rebellion recognized across the globe. This is the insane story of Harley Davidson and how a backyard experiment became an American legend. The early 20th century was full of unimaginable advances. Rail networks were expanding, steam engines powered factories, and with the invention of the combustion engine, the world had just begun experimenting with its first automobiles. But in rural parts of the United States, daily travel still happened on horseback. However, that was about to change soon. A new machine was transforming everything. They called it a bicycle. It was one of the most important inventions of its time, but it relied on manual labor, and this sparked a new question. What if an engine could be mounted on a bicycle? That single idea led to the birth of several early motorcycle companies across the United States. And for two young factory workers in Milwaukee, it became an obsession. William Harley and Arthur Davidson came from immigrant families, and they both found their first jobs at a bicycle factory. Harley worked on the assembly floor, while Arthur trained as a pattern maker. Together, they dreamed of building their own motorcycle. But it wasn't that simple. With no money to rent a proper workshop, Harley and Davidson began working in a small, run-down outbuilding behind the Davidson family home. By day, they worked full-time factory jobs, and by night, they studied existing engines, experimented with designs, and learned through trial and error. After nearly 2 years of work, they were finally ready to test their first machine. But it failed miserably. With no money and only the bare minimum of resources, they had improvised wherever they could. Rumors spread that they had even used tomato cans in place of a proper carburetor. And more importantly, the prototype simply didn't produce enough power. It struggled even on flat ground. Years of effort collapsed into silence, and the dream they had built began to slip away. They realized they needed help, so they called Walter Davidson. Walter was Arthur's older brother, but more importantly, he was a machinist at a railroad company. Unlike Bill and Arthur, Walter had a serious hands-on experience with precision machining and metal fabrication. Despite the failed road test, Walter was impressed with their passion. He could see how far the younger men had come with almost nothing, and he believed that with proper engineering, they could build an engine powerful enough to work. So, in 1903, Walter made a bold decision. He quit his job with the railroad and returned home to Milwaukee. For days, he studied their failed prototype, and finally he identified the core problem: engine size. At the time, bicycles used a diamond frame. This severely limited the engine space. To solve this, Walter proposed a radical change: the loop frame. This new design not only provided space for a larger engine, but also improved balance. It was the breakthrough they needed. But there was another problem. The backyard workshop wasn't enough anymore. To build something this complex, they needed real industrial equipment. And luckily, they got another savior. Arthur and Walter's oldest brother, William A. Davidson, happened to be a foreman at an industrial parts company in Milwaukee. Risking his job, he secretly allowed his brothers to use the machine shop after hours. And in 1904, they finally built a successful prototype, establishing the Harley Davidson Motor Company. Production began slowly. Each motorcycle was still built by hand, but to most people, it looked like something from another world. When it sped past, people stopped and stared, wondering what they had just seen. So money finally began coming in. Over the next year, Harley Davidson produced and sold just 8 motorcycles, each priced at $200, equivalent to roughly $7,300 today. In their first year, they profited around $170, which is equivalent to roughly $6,200 today. They were planning to use it for a real factory. Their dream was fulfilling. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But suddenly, it was all gone. Arthur had kept the money hidden under his mattress. But before they could use it for their factory, the money was stolen by the cleaning lady. With no capital left, they found themselves on the edge of collapse. It seemed the story would end before it even began. For most startups, this would have been the end. But just when the dream seemed finished, help arrived from an unexpected place. After hearing what happened, the Davidsons' uncle agreed to give them a loan. With the loan of $170, the company finally moved out of their workshop and into the first true Harley Davidson factory. Like the components of an engine, each of the four founders filled a crucial role in the company's operations. Bill Harley became the chief engineer. Arthur Davidson took charge of sales and distribution. William A. Davidson oversaw manufacturing, and Walter Davidson managed day-to-day operations as company president. With the management team in place, they hired 6 full-time workers and began turning out about 1 motorcycle per week. As they started production, the pressure fell on Arthur Davidson to sell them. So Arthur found an idea that made them stand out from the competition: dealerships. Back in those early days, you would buy a motorcycle just about anywhere. Hardware stores, general stores. Harley Davidson was one of the first companies to build dedicated motorcycle-only dealerships, and that went a long way to driving their early sales success. But this was not enough. They needed to build trust. This was truly the dawn of the motoring age in America, and motorcycle racing was hugely popular. It was the most popular spectator sport in the country, with many of the biggest board track races drawing as many as 10,000 to 15,000 spectators. And through all these races, Indian, the first motorcycle company in the U.S., was dominating the marketplace. Harley Davidson stayed out of racing for a reason. The popular board track races were deadly. Hundreds of people used to get injured, and some of them even died. But once again, Walter Davidson took the lead. He believed that it was necessary to show the world what they have got. So Walter threw a motorcycle on a train and took it all the way out to the East Coast to join the Catskill Mountain Challenge. The Catskill Mountain Challenge was the nation's most important endurance event, and as expected, the overwhelming favorite was America's #1 motorcycle manufacturer, Indian. Indian already had a 2-year head start. They even had a full support crew of mechanics. On the other hand, people treated Harley Davidson as the cowboys of Milwaukee. But this fueled Walter to push even harder. And against all odds, Walter single-handedly dominated the Indian racing team and their experienced crew. Walter Davidson's victory did more than win a race. It changed everything. Almost overnight, Harley Davidson's name spread far beyond Milwaukee. For the first time, customers were convinced. So orders began pouring in. Dealers who had once ignored them now wanted inventory. Riders who had never heard of their machine suddenly demanded it by name. This demand forced them to innovate. By the end of the decade, Harley Davidson's engineers were pushing beyond single-cylinder engines. In 1909, they invented the V-twin engine. It was an upgrade with 2 cylinders which provided more power and speed. But beyond that, V-twin became an identity. People remembered it with its deep, thunderous sound which every other brand lacked. By 1913, the backyard workshop days were long gone. Harley Davidson broke ground on a massive new factory on Juneau Avenue in Milwaukee. It was unlike anything the company had ever attempted. This gave them the boost they needed. Assembly lines spiked the production. What once took days could now be done in hours. The company that began in a shed was now evolving into a big giant. And just as the company got some success, the world caught fire.
April 6, 1917, and the United States took up arms to join the Allies.
When the United States entered World War I, the military needed reliable machines for its soldiers, and Harley Davidson answered the call. The company re-engineered its motorcycles for war: stronger frames, heavier-duty engines, finished in military paint. Over 15,000 Harley Davidson motorcycles were ordered by the U.S. Army to be shipped to France. It became an effective tool for Allied effort, a reliable machine which soldiers could trust during the war. But its most iconic moment came at the end of the war, when Corporal Ray Holtz rode a Harley Davidson into Germany. With a single photograph, Harley became the face of U.S. patriotism. Everyone wanted the same machine which the Army was using, so the demand kept surging. By the early 1920s, Harley Davidson became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, operating in more than 60 countries. They earned the nickname of Hog, inspired by the championship Harley Davidson racing team mascot. To many, Harley Davidson no longer felt like a company that could fail. It felt permanent. But history has a way of humbling even the strongest brands. After the stock market crash, the Great Depression seized America, and motorcycles were among the first luxuries to disappear. As thousands of Americans lost their jobs, buying a motorcycle fell to the very bottom of their priorities. And this left a brutal impact on Harley Davidson. In 1929, the company sold nearly 24,000 motorcycles. By 1934, that number had collapsed to just 3,700. With demand gone, the company was once again staring straight at collapse. As the walls closed in, the founders knew that survival depended on finding a way to sell motorcycles without the resources to develop new models. So, Arthur Davidson figured out the answer by emphasizing style. The company began refining how its bikes looked and felt. Hand-applied pinstriping, distinctive paint schemes, cleaner branding, and a stronger visual identity. These small changes kept the brand alive when competitors vanished. Slowly, painfully, Harley Davidson endured the worst economic collapse in modern history. But as the company survived, its founders began to fade. Between the late 1930s and early 1940s, Harley lost three of its founders. William A. Davidson, Bill Harley, and Walter Davidson all faded from the story, one by one. The next generation stepped in to carry the torch, but history had other plans. As Bill Davidson settled into his role as president, the United States entered World War II. And almost immediately, Harley Davidson was called upon once again. With the war raging, the U.S. Army asked the company to produce nearly 30,000 motorcycles per year. It was a tough task, but the company answered the call just as it had decades earlier. They produced a new model for the U.S. Army and its allied. They named it the WLA, but the world called it the Liberator, because this machine helped U.S. soldiers to liberate the occupied Europe from Nazi regime. More than 90,000 Liberators were produced for Allied forces. And when they won the war once again, Harley became the symbol of freedom. The post-war boom ignited Harley Davidson sales, but the victories didn't come without a loss. In 1950, Bill Davidson heard tragic news. The last surviving founder, Arthur Davidson, along with his wife Clara, was tragically killed in a car collision. With Arthur's death, all the original founders have passed. That same year, Harley Davidson's greatest rival finally fell when Indian Motorcycle shut down their production. Now all eyes turn to Bill Davidson, with the expectation that he'll maintain the legacy that was left. For the first time in history, Harley Davidson stood alone. It was now the only major motorcycle manufacturer in the United States, but the monopoly didn't mean peace. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, a new culture emerged: motorcycle clubs. Custom choppers, long hair, and leather jackets became a way of rebellion. The most iconic club to emerge from this trend is California's Hell's Angels. Though it helped to gain short-term sales, the rise of the outlaw bikers spoiled the image of Harley Davidson. At the same time, Japan was entering the competition. Harley Davidson survived the Depression and war, but the next fight was for its own identity. By the late 1960s, small motorcycles from Japan began arriving in the United States: Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki. They were lightweight, affordable, easy to ride, and most importantly, they worked with electric starters. For Harley Davidson, they were toys, but that was a serious mistake. Companies like Honda understood something Harley didn't. Motorcycles didn't have to be intimidating. Students rode them, families rode them, first-time riders bought them, and millions of Americans who would never have considered a Harley suddenly felt comfortable buying a motorcycle. At the same time, Honda launched one of the most successful ad campaigns in automotive history. You meet the nicest people on a Honda. While Harley Davidson was associated with loud engines, leather jackets, and outlaw imagery, Japanese bikes were being welcomed into suburban driveways. Harley wasn't just losing its market share, it was losing an entire generation. By the late 1960s, the pressure was undeniable. Sales were slipping and tech was outdated. The factories needed massive investment to modernize, and family ownership struggled to keep up with the scale required to compete globally. So, in 1969, Harley Davidson made a decision that would define its darkest era. The company was sold to American Machine and Foundry, AMF. On paper, the deal made sense. AMF had money and manufacturing expertise. But the AMF didn't understand motorcycles. They pushed the production, but quality was neglected. The result was disastrous. Motorcycles left factories unfinished. Parts didn't fit properly. Reliability fell even further. Loyal customers felt betrayed. Harley Davidson, once a symbol of American engineering pride, became the punchline of jokes among riders. On the other hand, Japanese manufacturers surged ahead. Honda alone sold more motorcycles in the US than Harley could dream of. By the mid to late 1970s, Harley Davidson was closer to collapse than at any point in its history. The brand that once symbolized freedom was facing extinction. The future was uncertain, and time was running out, so they played their last gamble. In 1981, management made a decision to buy back the company. Von Beals and Willie G. Davidson took on massive debt to reclaim Harley Davidson from corporate ownership. It seemed like a celebration, but in reality, it was a rescue mission. If they failed, Harley Davidson would disappear forever. The first thing the new leadership realized was that Harley Davidson wasn't losing because Japan was cheating. It was losing because it was worse. The factories were outdated, and there was no concept of quality control. So Harley did something few American manufacturers were willing to do at the time. They studied Japan. They adopted their lean production techniques, inspired by companies like Honda and Toyota. This wasn't about copying motorcycles, it was about rebuilding discipline. For the first time in years, Harley employees weren't rushed to produce more. They were pushed to produce better. The quality was improving, but even with better manufacturing, Harley was still bleeding. And that's when they played their masterstroke. In 1983, Harley Davidson petitioned the U.S. government for temporary tariffs on large displacement imported motorcycles. President Ronald Reagan approved the measure. The decision sparked outrage, but it worked. The tariffs gave Harley Davidson the breathing room it desperately needed to finish its transformation. By the late 1980s, Harley Davidson re-entered the global stage, not as a mass manufacturer, but as a premium American icon. And in 1986, when they went public, they gained the trust of Wall Street. Today, Harley Davidson is a global brand operating in over 100 countries, generating nearly $6 billion a year and commanding some of the highest margins in the motorcycle industry. The brand that was once considered as the invention of cowboys now owns the heritage of American identity. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.